I want to thank everybody for getting on today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about the governor's budget briefing, or a budget briefing on the governor's budget address that took place last week. We've gone through the information and we've compiled it into some analysis for our membership. Just as a reminder, we're going to be posting this webinar afterwards on our website, so if you want to go back and rewatch it or look at some of the slides, they will be available afterwards on the website. So we're going to move forward. Also, just as a reminder, if you have any questions as we go through here, you can go ahead and type those questions in. I'll be able to see them and we'll address them once we get to the end of the webinar. First, we have to pay our bills. I want to thank our sponsors, Capital Blue Cross, Members First Credit Union, and McNeese, Wallace & Nurick for their generous support of NFIB and their recognition of the work that we do on behalf of small business owners in Pennsylvania. So I think it's important to recap what happened last year. We still have an unresolved budget scenario from the 15-16 fiscal year. About a year ago, the governor proposed a 16% increase in spending, and of course that was paid for with a host of proposed tax increases, including raises in the personal income tax, in the sales tax rate, and expansion of the sales tax to additional items and services. Of course, the severance tax that we've heard so much about through the media campaigns, increased taxes on banks, and the list goes on. In June, the legislature sent the governor a no tax increase budget. And along with that, they sent him public pension reform and historic liquor privatization plans, and the governor vetoed all three of those. That then led to what I refer to as trench warfare through the rest of the summer and into the fall. There were a number of other procedural motions that occurred in that time when the legislature tried to override the governor's veto, attempted to send him another budget. But in November, there was a quote-unquote framework agreement that was announced that included a $30.8 billion spend. It included some type of property tax relief or reform, although that was undefined. It was to include some type of pension reform to be defined later, and of course an unspecified $1 billion in new taxes to pay for it. And in a couple slides, I'm going to go through what some of those things were, because I think, nothing's really ever dead in Harrisburg until it's 6 feet underground. So we need to be prepared to look at those things going forward and be ready for them to come back. In December, the framework collapsed, in part because of a lot of pushback that came from taxpayers in regard to the $1 billion in new taxes. And people were calling Harrisburg politicians and saying, enough is enough, we can't afford any new and higher taxes. So the framework collapsed also because pension reform failed in the House, and the pension reform piece became very much tied to the ability to raise taxes in the legislature, that without pension reform there was not going to be any type of discussion on the tax piece. And then in December, when that passed, the governor line item vetoed $7 billion of it. The easiest way to look at that is he cut in half the three biggest spending items. He cut in half the money that goes to our school districts, he cut in half the money allocated for corrections, and he cut in half the Medicaid budget that goes to hospitals and to managed care organizations to pay for the Medicaid program in Pennsylvania. And then there was a host of other things that were cut out that include a number of areas that are important to lawmakers. So last week, the governor proposed a budget that, again, calls for massive increases in spending. This time around, he's proposing $33.3 billion for the 16-17 fiscal year. But we still have an unresolved issue for the 15-16 fiscal year. His budget assumes the framework number, $30.8 billion. I'm going to show you a chart after this that puts that all into perspective. But what that really means is a 5.8% increase in spending for 15-16 and an 8% increase in spending for 16-17. To put that in perspective, the state's independent fiscal office projects that real GDP and inflation for the next 4 or 5 years will be at around 2%. So really what we're talking about is government growing about 4 times faster than the private sector. To pay for this, he's proposing, again, 15 new and different tax increases. Those add up to $3.6 billion over the 2 years. I'm going to detail those in a future slide. But the key areas of spending here, we're talking $800 million just to public pension increases. We're talking $800 million to human services. We're talking $500 million in new spending in education, both K through 12 and higher ed. Obviously, there's a corrections increase. That a lot of that is going into pensions and healthcare costs for the workers. And we've got a $100 million increase in debt service. So those make up kind of the biggest buckets of spending, and obviously there's other areas of spending included within that. But just to give you an idea of where he's proposing to spend the money. This chart gives you kind of a historical perspective over the last several years of the total spend. And if you look down, to your right, in the blue is what the governor's proposing. And those are pretty sharp increases in spending compared to where we've been historically. The yellow bar there in 15-16 represents what the legislature passed in December, which is also a fairly large increase over 14-15 spend. So it puts it into perspective what we're really talking about here. This is a chart that shows pre-K through 12 state education funding. We got this chart from the House Republican Appropriations Committee, but it shows, there's this narrative out there that we are underfunding education, that we don't spend enough on our school districts. And I wanted to give you some context to that and really provide you with some of the actual numbers here. You can see what we're talking about. This ends with 15-16. This was what was passed by the legislature in December. And as you can see, contrary to some of what you read in the newspapers or you see in the news, education funding has not been cut. It's actually, we've seen consistent increases over the last 5 years. The blue section of those bars that you see there, that represents the federal stimulus money that was taken away after Governor Rendell decided to put those dollars into education and supplant other funding, which really created the crisis when those dollars went away. This is a chart that I got from our friends at the Commonwealth Foundation, but I think it's important to note, going back to my point, that we hear is that we have an education crisis in Pennsylvania. We're significantly underfunding our schools. Well, the facts just don't bear out. In fact, we're the 10th highest in per pupil spending amongst the 50 states. When you look at the state share of funding as compared to the other 50 states, we're right in the middle. We're ranked 24th. We're right at the national average. We get an equal share of federal funding. Where we see a significant imbalance is how much local spending goes on in our education system. What the governor would like is to shift more of that local funding onto the state, but when you look at it as a total, we're spending about $3,000 or more per pupil above the national average already, and the question becomes for many of us, how much is enough? This chart illustrates the proposed tax increases that the governor's talking about. Of course, a number of these he's actually proposed to make retroactive to the beginning of this year. It's unclear exactly how that will occur for some of these, including the personal income tax increase. Will individuals actually have to get out their checkbook and send the state a check to reflect the taxes that were not paid up until the point of whenever he thinks this will pass? He threw this out there and said we're going to make it retroactive to January 1st, and a lot of questions are coming around. Budget hearings start next week with the governor's cabinet secretaries, and you can bet that those will be some key questions that are going to get asked. But just to run down here quickly, you can see that there's dollar figures for both what I'll term as last year, the 15-16 fiscal year, or the fiscal year we're currently in, and then next year, the 16-17 fiscal year. Personal income tax, it's 11% increase in the personal income tax. The sales tax expansion, he proposes to expand it to cable TV, so that's your cable bill, to movie and theater tickets. So you take the family to the movies, you're going to pay sales tax on those tickets now, and also digital downloads, your books, your music, and software that you're downloading online. He's still proposing to increase taxes on banks. And this is new, an insurance premiums tax. There's already an insurance premiums tax of about 2% on property casualty and fire insurance. He's proposing to add another 0.5% to that. Really what that means is it's a $100 million tax increase on our insurance premiums. This would include your car insurance, your home insurance, your property insurance at your business. And we believe, although no one's been able to explain to us yes or no at this point, we continue to ask, but we believe this could also include your workers' comp insurance. Many people view that as being casualty insurance, and we think at this point that we have to assume that that will also include a tax increase on your workers' comp insurance. He's also proposing an increase in cigarette taxes, adding a 40% at wholesale tax on other tobacco products, which includes smokeless tobacco, e-cigarettes, and loose tobacco. He's proposing, of course, the severance tax that we can't hear enough about, and also a new tax on promotional play at casinos. As I understand, this is the kind of the free pools or the free hands that sometimes the casinos give to some of their high-value players. So as you can see, over the 2 fiscal years, it adds up to about $3.6 billion in tax increases to pay for this whole package. As I mentioned before, there was a whole list of other items that were being kicked around last year, and I think it's important to keep them on our mind as the legislature could pivot to these things where the governor has made it somewhat clear that he doesn't care where the money comes from, he just wants to get the money. Just a quick note, the capital stock and franchise tax, this is a tax that NFIB has spent 15 years fighting to get rid of, and thankfully we can finally say that it's been put to bed. As of the beginning of this year or the end of last year, the capital stock and franchise tax has been fully eliminated, which is great news for job creators. But the other areas that have been talked about, capping the vendor compensation, this is the amount that businesses get to keep to compensate them for the cost of collecting sales tax for the state. The governor would cap that at $25 a month, which is significantly less than what most businesses get. There have been other revenue options that have been out there, adding internet-based gaming, so internet poker through the casinos, that type of thing, would be about $140 million in 1 year for licensing and $35 million annually in tax revenue, expanding slot machines to off-track wagering sites, a business filing fee. This was something that we activated the NFIB membership on and had historic engagement on. We had hundreds of letters going in to lawmakers telling them that they oppose this. But this is a fee that would be on every business entity, C Corps, S Corps, LLCs, partnerships, and it would be a tax that you would pay while filing your taxes. So it would be essentially a privilege fee that would tax you just for the privilege of paying your taxes as a business. We pushed back very strongly against that, and I think we were able to really put the brakes on that, but we need to continue to keep that in our sights. And then also there was a number of other sales tax expansion ideas that were out there, removing the trade-in value exemption for vehicles. So if you buy a new vehicle and you trade in another, you can deduct the value of the trade-in. There was a proposal to remove that, which would be a significant tax increase. Sales tax expansion to amusement, recreational parks, personal care services, and other personal care services. This is your dry cleaning, your haircuts, your manicures, those types of things. A lot of small businesses would be impacted by that. And then also common carrier parking lots and garages, so public transit, taxi cabs, parking in the cities, etc. So with all that in mind, I thought it'd be good to just show how do we match up in comparison to other states? So I went through a number of different studies and pulled out the key indicators. First, state and local tax burden. We have the 15th highest state and local tax burden, according to the Tax Foundation, amongst the 50 states. Our economic performance is not very good. 39th worst, according to ALEC's Rich States and Poor States report. And that is based on GDP growth, migration, how many people are leaving your state, and also job growth. And so when you factor those three things in together, we fared 39th worst. So it's not all too surprising that we also fare 48th worst in new business startups, and that's a report from the Kauffman Foundation that they've been tracking the number of new businesses established in each state, and we're not doing so well. Some of that could be because we have the 17th highest average workers' compensation costs, and that's according to ALEC's report. They tracked actual spending on workers' comp policies. We have the 5th highest unemployment taxes, and that's right from the U.S. Department of Labor, and that's measured as a percentage of total payroll. We actually have the highest tax rate, but as a percentage of total payroll, it's the 5th highest. And personal income tax. We hear a lot that we have a flat, low-rate personal income tax, but the reality is the state's independent fiscal office did a report on this, and they said that while we have a lower flat rate at the state level, our local income taxes are relatively high compared to other states. So when you add it all up, we're actually 21st highest. We're a little bit above the median there in terms of our income tax burden in Pennsylvania. The governor also proposed a minimum wage increase to $10.15 an hour. He was short on specifics as to how he would do this, although there's been a number of bills introduced that would phase that in over about 1.5 to 2 years. It would be a significant jump from $7.25 to $10.15 an hour. I've included a few facts and of course some humor here. The first cartoon here shows a politician congratulating a young man on, "Congratulations, I raised your minimum wage," and of course, we've also taken the first rung of the economic ladder out of reach. And another one of my favorites, you see a gentleman saying 12 bucks for a crappy hamburger, and the guy behind the counter says, "Yeah, but look on the bright side, I'm getting $15 an hour," and the other gentleman says, "Well, what bright side? I just got fired." So a few facts just to keep in mind, because the minimum wage discussion often gets distorted. According to the Pennsylvania Independent Fiscal Office, and of course this is our independent, kind of analogous to the Congressional Budget Office, they did an analysis of the governor's proposal, and they estimated that it would eliminate 31,000 jobs. So that's an independent, very well-respected institution here in Harrisburg, and even they say, look, this is going to eliminate entry-level jobs for low-skilled workers. Another fact, because we often hear the narrative that someone raising children shouldn't be forced to live in poverty and work minimum wage. The reality is 82% of those earning minimum wage have no children at all. So the reality doesn't match the narrative. Now, does that mean that there's individuals earning minimum wage that need to be helped into getting into better paying jobs? Sure. But raising the minimum wage is a very poor policy at reaching the goal of helping those individuals. A couple other facts. The majority are under the age of 24. 60% of those earning minimum wage live in a household above poverty, above $40,000 a year. In fact, 1 in 3 live in a household with an income above $75,000 a year. So those are just a few things to keep in mind. We're going to be battling minimum wage as we go into this year. It is an election year, and typically that tends to be a year that the public sector unions push minimum wage very hard. And so we're going to be very proactive in educating lawmakers about the impacts that could have, both for small business and for entry-level workers with very little skills. So what can you do? You can take action, speak up. There's lots of opportunities to submit letters to the editor, write your lawmakers, invite lawmakers to tour your business. Please contact us. If you would be interested in doing any of these things, we can help you. We can help you write letters to the editor. If you're willing to submit it, we'll write it for you. If you're willing to speak to the media, minimum wage tends to be a topic that we struggle to find businesses that are willing to go out and speak on the record or talk to the media about it, but it's so important to have that face given the other side, because the advocates are out there spreading all kinds of myths, and we need to get the truth out there. So I've included Suzanne's contact information. She's our communications director. She would be the best person to contact if you're interested in doing a letter to the editor, or if you want to just call and say, hey, I'm willing to talk to the media on whatever subjects you're willing to talk to the media on, and we keep a list of those members so that we know who to get to when we get that press call. And of course, the best way that you can participate is by showing up at NFIB events. Here's a little plug for our Small Business Day at the Capitol that we will be having later this year. It will be taking place on April 4th and the 5th. We're delighted to say that Steve Hayes, he's a writer for the Weekly Standard and is frequently on Fox News, is going to be attending our dinner that on the evening of Monday the 4th to be our keynote speaker. Really look forward to what he has to say about the presidential election and what's going on in Washington. He has some great insight, and I think it's going to really add to the event. We're also going to have a number of really excellent seminars bridging topics of employment law, what's going on in the state budget, what's going on nationally. We've included a number of great speakers in that event. We really hope that you'll be able to join us in that. The ticket cost is only $65 per person. And of course, if you're willing to purchase a whole table, you can get that for $520 for a table of 8 and $650 for a table of 10. Bring your friends and invite them to see what NFIB is doing and how we're protecting small businesses. It's really going to be a great event. You should be receiving something in the mail about that within the next couple of weeks, and registration will be opening soon. If you see this and you're interested in this right now, of course you can contact Susan in our office. You can call her at 717-232-8582, or you can email her at the email shown here. So that's all I have. I don't know if there's any questions. I haven't seen any come in yet, but give it a couple minutes to see if there's any questions from the folks on the webinar, and I'd be happy to answer those. You can type them into the GoToMeeting box now. Oh, I got one here. What exactly, here's the question, what exactly is included for sales taxes of service industries? Does it include barbers, accountants, and home care services? What are the chances it will pass? In the personal, well, there's different categories here. At one point last year, everything was on the mix, completely eliminating the sales tax exemptions for all services, including CPAs, legal services, engineering services, financial services. You can go down through the consulting services. Everything was in the mix in last year's proposal. What the governor put on the table this year is limited in the sales tax expansion piece to the cable TV, the theater tickets, and the digital downloads. But that being said, we've also heard a number of other areas coming from lawmakers as maybe a place that they would want to go, including those personal care services, including barbers, haircuts, dry cleaners, manicures, those types of things. So, I would suggest that if you're in one of those industries, you contact your lawmakers anyway and let them know that what it would do to your industry, because as we're seeing right now in Harrisburg with the tax conversation on the table, really anything is fair game for them. And so they need to know how that's going to impact your business. Any other questions? Okay, well, again, we appreciate you getting on the webinar. This will be posted and available afterwards. And as always, we appreciate your membership with NFIB. If you ever need anything, we're here available in the office, 717-232-8582, and look forward to talking with you next time. Thank you.